Why do people have goals?
I help people work on their goals. I have people help me work on my goals. I've found through my experience that goals have led me to a more fulfilled life. When working with other people and working with their goals, I find that people that are struggling often fall into one of four categories. One, they may have had goals but just don't have goals right now. Two, they may have unclear goals. Three, they may have goals in some part of their life but not in other parts of their life. And fourth and finally, people have never had goals. Welcome to the Self Sessions on LeeCampbell.com. Setting goals can be difficult, both intellectually and emotionally. The bigger the aspiration, the more difficult it will be to create those goals, to create the plan, and to execute that plan to work towards those goals. Also, the higher the risk of failure. So that raises the question, well, why should I have goals? So why should I have goals? That is a good question. Just because goals are talked about in your training at work or in popular self-help books isn't a very good justification of why you should do something like that. So what would be a good justification for having your goals? So why should we have goals? Well, I've formed an opinion that goals can be a great way of avoiding incidental drift. So what is incidental drift? Let's share a story. I met up with a friend and we were chatting, regaling about how life has been for both of us. And they talked about how life is maybe not as ideal at the moment. It was a bit tough. The job market, the economy was a bit tough, and they hadn't seen as much of their family or spent enough quality time with their family as they had hoped. Also, they probably weren't feeling that they could have been as healthy as they had hoped. However, when we talked about what was going well in their life, they sort of lit up and said, well, I have been to some really lovely restaurants recently, some lovely shows. And then they pulled out their phone and showed me some pictures of recent travels and adventures. So it was wonderful. I said, oh, that's really great. So when I asked them, which would they rather have had, these things that are making them feel good or these things that they're feeling unfulfilled with? And that's where it became interesting. They said that they would trade in the tastes, tech and travel any day for quality of family, fitness and financial freedom. And that's when I asked them, well, what are the things that you're doing to make sure that your priorities are prioritized? And that's where the conversation became a bit awkward, because it became quite clear that there was no plan. There was no way of putting their priorities first. And in fact, what was happening was there was mounting regret. Like a jellyfish drifting through the ocean, my friend was being taken along with whatever current they found themselves in. Not so much the captain of the voyage, but a passenger. They had not allowed themselves the vulnerability to identify the gap in where they were and where they wanted to be, nor had they given themselves the bravery and drive to close that gap. Now, this anecdote shouldn't be confused with saying that travel, adventures, restaurants and shows and nice technology things are bad. That's not what I'm saying here. It's that they had failed to prioritize what they truly wanted and what they had. That it was the gap between what they wanted and what they had. It was the gap in the two behaviors that led to what they had versus what they weren't doing that led to what they wanted. So how does this happen? This isn't a one-off scenario. I see this broadly. I think it's because it's often easier and safer to avoid pain and suffering, and we put our energy towards that, instead of putting our energy towards crossing that shaky bridge between a life that is tolerated and a life that is fulfilled. I have a theory that, and it's just a theory, that potentially in westernized society that we have an overly supported youth. So during our youth we have our family, our education sector and often extracurricular activities like sport that can provide a very well supported and well trod pathway. Now this is great, and I'm not saying supportive environments are bad, but it means that we aren't exercising that skill of finding our own pathway ourselves. This can be exacerbated if we're lucky enough to find ourselves in an internship or graduate program. So even as we move into the workforce, which can be a scary moment, that we can still be supported there. That can lead to people in their mid-20s, even 30s and 40s, that have still yet to exercise that muscle of finding a pathway themselves. So we can end up with some people in their mid-20s, 30s, very smart, well-educated, well-supported, that find themselves rudderless. Now this isn't to say that they haven't been working hard. This isn't to say that they haven't had their own struggle. But maybe they have had their hand on the oar of the boat that has been their life, while someone else has had the hand on the wheel. Someone else has been captain. And now they're finding themselves, well, without a captain, without a navigator, and all they have is that skill of rowing that oar, providing that forward momentum. So, without the captain to provide direction, without the navigator to provide reason behind that direction, you're left there just holding the oar. Now you could row, you could not row. It might not matter much. You might just end up drifting along like the jellyfish next to that boat. So, if you're looking for something more than a jellyfish, if you want to avoid that incidental drift, if you want to take control and look for a life that's more fulfilled and aim towards joy, then potentially you need a plan. And those plans may include setting goals.